We are going to the Thompson Center, which is a clinic for autism and neurodevelopmental disorders, here in Columbia to talk to Dr. Judith Miles. The Thompson Center is nationally known for its services pertaining to autism. Dr. Miles is a physician. She works with patients who have autism. She is also a co-founder of the Thompson Center. This is not the first time for Ashley to speak with Dr. Miles. In June, Ashley did a story on a study by Dr. Miles. The feedback she received from that story is what started our series. And so, we are back at the Thompson Center.
Families can come here and receive a whole array of services, starting with diagnosis. And that's generally the major question that people call with.
Dr. Miles says that the center's patients come from all over.
We're sitting here in Columbia, Missouri, but we really serve the entire state. Being the first autism clinic in the state, and really the only one for a number of years, we really have become the center point for the state and where referrals come to.
The reason for Ashley going to speak to Dr. Miles in June was because she had recently completed a study that states there is no link between thimerosal in vaccinations and autism.
What we found with our study, which is very simple, was that there was no increase in the percentage of families who had a child with autism who actually got thimerosal during their pregnancy.
After their first interview, Ashley received many emails from parents and concerned doctors saying they are skeptical of the study because Johnson & Johnson funded it. Ashley asks Dr. Miles why a drug company-funded study should be trusted.
They did not see the results before they were published. They had no interest or request for any sort of oversight onto anything I was doing. Their only requirement was that if they paid to do the research study, that it had to be published.
Ashley then asks if drug company-funded studies present a conflict of interest.
Sure. I think, you have to be very careful in any kind of research. In research, you are generally only seeing a very small part of something. It's wonderful if you get to be the person who sort of brings everything in the field together. But most of the time, research moves in waves, and those waves are basically dependent on thousands of people doing their part along the way.
Ashley asks Dr. Miles what her and the Thompson Center's best guess on what the cause of autism is.
20 years ago, 15 years ago, when I started working with children with autism, what everybody sort of assumed was that this was one disorder and that we were going to find the cause. Now we realize that autism is actually hundreds of disorders, and the behavioral phenotype can be caused in many, many ways. So we find that around 15% of children, we can actually come up with a specific genetic etiology.
While Dr. Miles maintains that thimerosal contained in vaccines has no link to autism, multiple studies, and one in particular conducted by Dr. Boyd Haley, states that autistics represent a subset of the population that are more susceptible to toxic effects of mercury and thimerosal because they are not effective excretors. Ashley asks Dr. Miles to respond to this study.
Two kinds of science. It's very easy in science to put together should, supposition, plausible, sounds like a good story. That doesn't make it true.
Ashley also asks Dr. Miles to respond to a statement made by Dr. Frank Angley.
I don't want to comment on Dr. Angley. He's an old man. I'll let him rest on his laurels or whatever he's resting on.
Even though Dr. Miles refuses to respond to Dr. Angley's comments, she would comment on the anti-vaccines movement. All across the country, more parents are using exceptions as a way to get out of required vaccinations for their children to go to school.
When we look back at the development of pediatrics and pediatric care through the 20th century, the number one development that has saved more lives and created better quality of life for children is childhood vaccines.
When we finish the interview, we get some shots of Dr. Miles working at her desk, and then we shoot some outside shots. Robert Kessler, KOMU News, Columbia.